So I'm going to get the formal stuff out of the way first. And
Okay.
then we'll talk. All right, my name is Robert Bauman, and I'm interviewing Mr. Ken Silliman, and today is July 2nd of 2013. Interview is being conducted on the campus of Washington State University, Tri-Cities. And I'll be talking with Mr. Silliman about his family's history, about growing up in Kennewick, and about his memories of the area and the impact of Hanford on the area and so forth. So Mr. Silliman, I'm going to start by just asking you to talk a little bit about your family and how and why they came to Kennewick.
Well, my mother's family was a Case, and the Cases came in 1894 to the state of Washington. They came to Goldendale and then down to the Prosser area, and my granddad homesteaded then on Rattlesnake. When my mother and dad got married in 1914, Dad farmed a section of Grandpa's land for a year, and then he went out to the Weller Ranch and leased that, and he farmed that, I believe, till 1928, as close as I can figure. Couldn't afford to farm any more on dry land wheat on Rattlesnake, so he eventually took a job at Farmers Exchange, and that's how we got down to Kennewick. And then bought one of the partners out in 34 and the other one in 43. And we've had it since then.
Okay. And so your family moved into Kennewick in the
1930.
1930. Okay. And then you were born in Kennewick.
Yes, my brothers were all born on Rattlesnake. I was born in Kennewick in 1931.
Okay. And what sort of memories do you have of Kennewick as a young boy growing up? What sort of community was it like? What sorts of things did you do for fun?
Well, it was a very, very small town. Even in 1940, it was probably a little under 2,000 people. If anything happened in town and you got in any kind of trouble, well, your parents already knew about it by the time you got home. I learned to swim in the Columbia River and the irrigation canal there. Kennewick was very small. 10th Avenue was the boundary line of it on the south, Olympia on the west, and just past Gum Street on the east, so there wasn't much town here.
And so was it mostly an agricultural area then?
Definitely ag, both fruit and dryland wheat. Dryland wheat controlled a lot of the money there that was spent in the area and that.
Okay. I wanted to talk about Farmers Exchange a little bit. I know your grandfather or your father who bought part of the business.
My father.
Your father.
Yeah,
And
Carl Williams and Alfred Amon, who were two dryland wheat farmers, started it either in 23 or 24. I can prove both dates there. But they came in town, started. Alfred was mayor in Kennewick 4 different times, I believe it was in 4 different decades. And Carl Williams, I believe, was one of the trustees for WSU for a period of time there.
And so what's initially, what sorts of things did Farmers Exchange do?
Well, it started as a livestock trading outfit. We'd trade horses for pigs or chickens for cows or just whatever you wanted to trade there. And then they got into the feed business a little bit to feed their own livestock and to sell a little bit. Got into garden seeds just a little bit. That they were located right behind Washington Hardware on what at that time was Front Street. It's now Canal Drive. And our livestock pens were between us and Washington Hardware. They finally decided that the city they did not want the livestock. They're a half block off Kennewick Avenue, so we moved our livestock down to behind Church's Grape Juice there on some leased land. And then when Dad bought Alfred out, the last partner, in 43, he couldn't go out and trade livestock and run the store too, so we did away with the livestock at that time, other than we still get into chickens and rabbits and wild turkeys and things like that yet.
Um, so, did you help out at the store when you were growing up?
Oh,
or-
sure. I worked at the store. I was small for my age, so I didn't start right away there. And at that time, the feed was all 100-pound bags, except for wheat, and it was in catch weights, which was just whatever would fit in the bag. It could be 125, 130, 120 there, and that. But yeah, I worked there as a kid. But when I say how long I've worked there, which is 59 years, I don't count when I worked there as a kid because I probably wasn't worth much. But also, of course, we worked in the orchards there. We cut asparagus during after the war started. They let us out early. They started school late, so that we could go out and cut asparagus in the morning. Then we'd have to go to school some on Saturday to make up that time. Yeah.
Interesting. What was school like in Kennewick in the 1930s, 1940s?
Well, it's changed considerably from the 30s to the 40s. They built the new high school in Kennewick in 36, and the first graduating class was 37. One of my brothers that I was later in business with was in that class, and I started first grade in the fall of 37 there, but very, very small. You knew everybody and that till about 43. Then things went nuts, and people have asked us, didn't we resent all of a sudden the classes just being overflowing and having to use extra rooms and storage buildings and stuff like that? And we didn't think about that too much, just more kids to play with. And a lot of those kids that came in the 40s are still my very, very close friends.
Growing up, do you remember any like community celebrations, picnics, 4th of July parades, any of those sort of community events?
Oh, yes. We're right on 4th of July right now, and they always had a big to-do at the Keewaydin Park. There, the Rhineland wheat farmers would normally maybe make one round around the outside of their field to make sure their machine was working. Then they'd take a break and come to the to-do downtown here. And then right after that, they'd usually start harvest there. Then there was the grape festival in the 40s, I would guess, 46, 47. I remember that one specifically. They had two different entertaining groups. They had Spike Jones here and Jack Teagarden. And when Spike Jones sent them their contracts, there were two different contracts, and there were different amounts of money. So they took the cheaper one, so he put on the same show for 3 days in a row. That was on the 200, right in the street there in the 200 block on Kennewick Avenue. But some of the other grape festivals were held up around Keewaydin Park and that. We used to have rodeos up where the high school, Kennewick High School is now, there.
And so you were born in 1932?
31.
31.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you were growing up, during the Great Depression, did you have a sense that there was a economic depression going on, or as a young kid were you not really fully aware of this?
I probably wasn't fully aware of it. We had a great big garden. We had a couple of milk cows. We had chickens. We were pretty self-sufficient there on it, and I got a new pair of shoes usually at the start of school, a new pair of overalls, and so I was doing fine.
You were good.
Yeah, probably the folks were having to scrape and stew for it, but
Right. So going back to talk about the farmer exchange a little bit more, you mentioned that your father was partners with.
he went to work for Carl and Alfred.
Okay.
Then in 34, he bought Carl out. And he and Alfred then were partners till 43 when Alfred wanted to go run his cherry orchard. And so Dad bought him out there. And things were simpler then. They wrote the contract with an indelible pencil on half a piece of paper and tore the bottom half off, and I still have that contract.
Didn't have a room full of attorneys there.
No, no.
to do the contract. So you mentioned one thing you noticed when at some point, in the 1940s, suddenly there were a lot more students in the schools in
Mhm.
Kennewick. I wonder if you talk about any other changes you noticed or impact of the Hanford site on the town of Kennewick, city of Kennewick.
Well, yes, there was a lot of things. Avenue C went from the Old Green Bridge to Benton Street, and then there's Columbia Avenue down to the river. And that was houses, basically. And all of a sudden, any space that had a place you could put a trailer or any building that didn't have rain coming through it was rented out. I remember one time, I think it was in 43, that we lived at 603 North Everett, which was down by the river, about half a block off the river. And we were out in the yard on a Sunday. This car drove by several times, a little coupe with a man and woman in it. And finally the man got out and came over and said, "Do you know any place we can rent a bed and a bath there? We've lived here for a week just in our car, and we just can't find anything." My dad said, "Why don't you sit down and have some iced tea, and I'll call around. Surely I can find something." He came out about a half hour later and said, "You're right, there's just nothing for rent in Kennewick." He said, "You might as well stay with us till you find something." And they lived with us for about a month. He was an engineer from the East Coast, and his wife. And,
Right, so it impacted your family directly, at least.
oh, yeah.
Right.
And the schools and everything else. There, the road, when the workers would come home there at quitting time, the roads would be so full you couldn't even get on Columbia Avenue and that. I remember Newman's Grocery, finally, they had most of the groceries closed at 6 o'clock. He started a second grocery on the corner of Benton and Kennewick Avenue. It was a cash and carry rather than a charge and fill your order for you. But it stayed open late so the Hanford workers could get back and get some groceries there. So entertainment, I remember the folks would take their car over Saturday sometime and park on Kennewick Avenue, leave their car there. Then they'd go over in the evening, and people would walk down the street and visit, and women would sit in the cars, and men would walk up and down the street and visit with different guys. It was a different time.
You mentioned again, more students in school. Were there more schools built then? In the period?
Well, not right away. Not right away. My favorite thing to do as a little boy was to go with my dad when he was trading livestock. And he'd go to Wallula or Pasco or Cornell or Benton City or Richland. And I always had to ask him when we crossed the river whether we were going into Benton City or Richland, because they were both very, very, very small towns there. I think Richland had a store in it run by John Dam, if I recall right, and his daughter was our 6th grade teacher there. Jerry Dam was her name.
So you did go to the other towns sort of in the area at times?
Oh, sure. We came up to football games and the Kennewick, Pasco, and Richland. Pasco and Richland kind of fought back and forth. Pasco, of course, was a railroad town and that. But we had friends in Pasco and we had friends in Richland and that. We competed against some of them there.
So any other changes or ways that, the sort of significant growth seemed to affect Kennewick at all? If you can remember. Obviously, it changed some of the business practices. They stayed open later, at least.
Mm-hmm. That grocery store did, yeah. Mm-hmm. things were just chock full. Everything was chock full. For instance, there was a place called Camel's Cabins right at the base of the old Green Bridge. And I've heard stories that at times he had some CCC camp type places there with boards up about 4 foot and then canvas over the top. He rented those for 8 hours at a time. You moved in, ate, slept, got out so the next family could come in there.
Wow.
So like I say, everything was just chock full.
Right. Now, do you remember? So you were born in 31. So you were about 12 years old in 43 when the Hanford project started. I guess first of all, do you remember going back to 1941 when the attack on Pearl Harbor? Do you remember?
Oh, certainly.
That sort of thing, and any memories from that? And then when did you find out about something happening out at Hanford?
Well, you never knew what was happening in Hanford. If you asked somebody what was happening out there, they said they're building window Wilkie buttons or nylon stockings or something like that you couldn't get a hold of. But, of course, everything like sugar and shoes were rationed. So.
And when did you find out what was going on in Hanford after the war ended?
Yes. No, you just did not hear what was going on, and if somebody did say anything, they weren't there very long. There.
You just knew there was some sort of big project.
That's all we knew, was a big project. Yeah.
And so in going back, do you remember when you finding out about World War II itself, the attack on Pearl Harbor and that sort of thing?
Oh, yeah. As I recall, it was on a Sunday. And it affected me because my brother Clint, who was working for J.C. Penney's up in Palouse, he enlisted right away with the caveat that he be able to bring his stuff home before he went in, so he got to be home for Christmas. So that's the last Christmas he was home for a number of years.
Right. So your family was impacted
very
immediately.
Yeah, all three of my brothers were in World War II.
And so then what about yourself? What happened with you after finishing high school? What happened? What did you do from that?
Well, I'd grown up with a friend that lived down in the Garden Tracts with me there. His name was Bill Brace. We'd gone all the way through. We played together before school, went to school together, walked back and forth to school together, went to college together, roomed together in college. Then when the Korean War broke out, they weren't giving deferments to begin with. So I enlisted, and he sat it out, and finally they gave deferments there. So he went ahead and completed his college there, and then went to the University of Washington. That was at Central. And then he went on to the University of Washington, got his master's, and then did his service and put in his career with Boeing. And in fact, he was responsible for writing the Boeing contract out here a number of years ago when Boeing was doing the computer service out here. He was the sales manager.
Okay. And then what point did you come back to Farmers Exchange?
Well, when I got out of the service, I was considering a job with Fairchild Camera Corporation. I was in a RB-36 reconnaissance bomber outfit that used a lot of cameras, and my job was to run the shop to repair and service those. And I got offered a job there, but it would have been traveling. And by this time, I married while I was in the service. And my brother came back to South Dakota, where I was stationed at Ellsworth, and said, I'd like to come back to the store. And that's what I always wanted to do all my life. So I took him up on that. And when we got out, my wife and I came back here and went to work, and I've been there ever since.
And what year was that?
That was 1954. And Clint and I and Dad were in partnership. Then we bought Dad out shortly after that. Then Clint and I were in partners till 81. His son was going to buy him out, and then he backed out, so I bought him out. And then they shut down Hanford. And boy, did it have an effect on us through the 80s. Just almost busted us.
Really?
Yeah.
So again, more impact related to Hanford?
Oh, yeah. And Hanford still has a big impact on us. We didn't realize, some of these people that traded with us, been trading with us for a number of years. We didn't know what they did to us. That's old Joe, And when in '81, when they started letting all those people off, old Joe was coming in and saying, "Hey, make sure the family gets the feed and stuff they need. I'll send you a check. I'm going to Texas or somewhere else and see what I can find." So it really had effect on us in the 80s. Some of the layoffs since then haven't had as big effect, but they still affect us.
Yeah, so it definitely says something about the economic impact.
But there's been more diversification since then.
And since 1954, a lot of growth in Kennewick.
Considerably.
Changed quite a bit.
Yeah.
From 1954.
Yeah.
What are some of the biggest changes that you've seen since 1954 in Kennewick? Obviously, the size is one of it, right?
Oh, the size, the selection, the competition. Every time they open a big box store, they handle something that we handle there. But we find we can compete with them through service and other ways. And we've had to change. We started off trading cattle. Now we trade lawnmowers and power equipment there. And we still have the feed, and we still have the garden supplies, and we enlarged that. But you wouldn't recognize the store from what it was when I was a boy. We've also bought other buildings around us and expanded there.
Right, but still in downtown Kennewick.
Same location, other than the one move that we made there in '39 from behind Washington Hardware up to where we are now there.
Is there anything I haven't asked you about, or that you haven't talked about especially in terms of, say, growing up in Kennewick, or any stories or events that really stand out to you that you think you'd really like to talk about or be important to talk about?
Well, during the build-up of Hanford, we'd always had dust storms here. But during the build-up to Hanford, all the ground was been worked. And we had dust storms. You might as well just close everything down because you couldn't see. You couldn't drive. It was just really bad. Obviously, part of it was from the dry land wheat farmer, but a lot of it was just from everything building up and that. We were offered some land to collect a debt one time, and my brother and I went out and looked at it and decided it was too far out of town, and town wasn't building that way. And so we said no, we couldn't use that for payment for the debt. That land was at 395 and 10th Avenue in Kennewick, which now has got a whole bunch of businesses and PUD and that there. So
Probably a pretty valuable piece of property.
yeah, and everything built west to begin with. The city was able to, when Columbia Center came in, was able to slip in there and take a road and make it city property and get that in the city of Kennewick. But now it's building to the south, and that in the downtown area, I've seen it go up and down and up and down. At one time, I thought it was going to be just not livable down there, but it's changed again now, and new storefronts, the businesses are filling the downtown area. When we came home in '54, my wife was not from here, so I took her around the Tri-Cities, and we started grading the areas. We graded Pasco as the best shopping area in the Tri-Cities. Fourth and Lewis just had all sorts of stores around it, good shoe stores and good clothing stores and that. And Richland was nice and clean up there too. Not as many stores though, and we rated Pasco first, Richland second, and downtown Kennewick a very poor third. We had J.C. Penney, and that was about it. And that has changed. I would rate now Kennewick maybe as the top of the older areas there. But,
Any, what would you like, or, you know, for someone who maybe decades from now might be interested in watching your interview or something, and learning more about Kennewick or about the Tri-Cities or that sort of thing, what do you think is most important for them to understand about the town of Kennewick that you grew up in the 1930s and 1940s?
Well, it went from strictly a farm community. Everybody was either involved in farming somehow or dealing with farmers and that. And where the orchards have been torn out. Now there's houses. Where the biggest grape vineyard, Concord Grape Vineyard, was in the world, it's now buildings there. Those grapes are gone. So it's just entirely changed. It's becoming, the Tri-Cities has become a metropolitan type area there. And what are they, fourth or fifth in the state as far as there? You got Tacoma, Seattle, Tacoma, Spokane, and then maybe the Tri-Cities. Yeah, good place to live.
Yeah. Well, do you have any other things that you'd like to talk about or think would be important to talk about?
Not that I can think of.
Great. Well, thank you very much for
You bet.
for
It's
coming in today
been
and
my
doing the
pleasure.
interview.
I'm
Really
sorry I
appreciate
didn't
it.
have more on hand. Oh, there used to be a boat that went up the river to Hanford. I believe it's called the Hanford Flyer. And a number of years ago, when the Tri-City Herald was repainting one of their buildings and stripped the old paint off, I noticed on the building, on the east side of the building, there, and this building is just south of their main building, it had a sign up there for the Hanford Flyer there.
It was still on the building.
Yeah, but they covered it, of course, when they
Do you have any
repainted.
idea what years the Hanford Flyer was
No,
in
I do
operation?
not. I meant to ask Tom Moak about that if he had some information.
And so what did it take up?
I believe it took mail and it would take passengers and freight up.
Okay, that's a great story.
Yeah.
And that was still on the building after all those years.
Yeah. There used to be a couple of horse troughs there in downtown Kennewick too, but they're all gone too.
Right. All right, well, Mr. Silliman, thanks very much.
Thanks for having me, Bob.